My name is Nayab Rafiq. I'll be the host of this wonderful panel that's about to come. The topic of today's discussion is, of course, KSA'S Cloud Cost Conversation. Now, many of you will have seen the promo for this event. I was saying that KSA is quite unique in where it stands right now. You're currently, as a country, headed towards your 2030 vision, which is very exciting. Digital is a centerpiece to that. And within that digital centerpiece, cloud, I think, is really at the heart of this conversation. It enables so much. And we'll be discussing exactly how that will work. One of the key themes of today's event will definitely be the cost aspect of this, because I want to ensure that you're leaving this event not just with general high-level information, but some real specifics, and to ensure that you've got all of your real questions answered. So I would really encourage you. I'm going to be keeping my eye on the Q&A in the chat. Please post your questions. I'll definitely be asking the speakers these questions. And we've also asked the speakers to answer your questions when they're not being directly addressed by me. So you've got two things happening over here. So please feel free, engage with us as much as possible. And let's really make sure that in this next hour and 15 minutes, we've really helped to propel your journey towards cloud with some great insights from these great speakers. So let me pull up a slide. I'll introduce you to each of them, and then we'll immediately get started with this session. So I'll go from top left. So we have Badr Khan. He's Director of Digital Mobility from NEOM. Many of you in Saudi will know the NEOM project. It's a fantastic initiative, and he's a brilliant speaker to share some insights. From King Abdulaziz City for Science and Tech, we have Hussein Al-Jadali. He's a member of the Supervisory Committee for Cybersecurity as well. So he's got two great expertise and great areas to cover. From Nutanix, we have the cloud economist, Mark Tutton. From former Microsoft and currently a digital transformation advisor, Hassan Khwaja. Project Management Institute Saudi Chapter Director of Digital Transformation, we have Mohammed Shalan. And from NurNet, we have the CEO, Amjad Hafiz. So with all of those formalities out of the way, let me first of all address Hussein. Hussein, how are you today?
Pleased to be joining the guys in this event.
Yeah, same here. I'm really excited to get the conversation underway. So, Hussein, what I'm going to do through this conversation is progressively get deeper into the topic. So we'll be covering some real specifics around security and cost a little bit later. But before we get into those depths, let's just start off by getting the big picture here. So if I was to say to you, how has cloud really come into prominence, and how does it compare in relation to a lot of these emerging technologies that we're seeing? Could you set the scene for us a little bit and give us some context in that regard?
Yes. Actually, this is a very excellent question, because the map of technology is changing with time, especially lately. So a decade ago, the talk about cloud was what actually cloud promises to enterprises, government, and individuals. The promise of economics, cost effectiveness in COPEX and OPEX. So all that was the promises cloud brings to the dynamic change of ICT needs for enterprises and governments. That time, it's all about, cloud economics. Does it really brings what cloud promise for that? But now the time is changed and the requirements are changed. We are seeing more and more emerging technologies. So cloud was presented and positioned before as a technology that's interact directly with the individuals, with the enterprise, with the consumer. Right now, with the large scale of covering, large scale of geographic locations, with the tremendous need and requirements for serving, a huge number of population, with the lack of high caliber talents in sectors such as healthcare, all that derives all entities, government or private sectors, yet cloud is a vital technology back then and now. Now it's moving from a front technology into a backbone technology. So now we are talking about IoT, we are talking about artificial intelligence, we are talking about big data and data analytics, we are talking about blockchains. All these now needs to have a very intensive processing and storage capabilities. These are promised by cloud. So with that change in map, we are seeing cloud being, more into the backbone and making all the promises of emerging technologies as true as possible. We are seeing, new technologies coming as fog computing, as edge computing. These to expand, the reachment of services, the quality of services, and try to focus more into intensive processing and storage promised by cloud. Cloud now is not only promising the economics, it's also promising a scalability, reliability, and secure delivery of services. So a new promise is coming up by cloud, and I think cloud has been proved, whatever is the industry, whatever is the limitation or the challenge, cloud always will have an answer to that.
Fantastic. Hussein, thank you very much for that. Yeah, I think that was a brilliant setting the tone. And we'll come back to you in a moment to discuss security, which I know is one of your area of expertise. But if I'm summarizing what you're saying right now, it's essentially the role of cloud is changing. It's becoming even more important, and it's really becoming an enabler for a lot of these other emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence, which Badr Khan from Neon will touch on a little bit later. So essentially, the role of cloud is just growing in importance, and it's becoming an enabler for a lot of the other emerging technologies which are powering the digital transformation forward. I'd love to bring this over to Hassan Khwaja now. Hassan, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Yeah, really well, Hassan. Let's jump into a case study, because I know you've got some really interesting case studies. We were talking the other day and you're referring to Netflix and some really interesting examples. I think case studies are a great way to see how things work in reality. So we obviously are going to be discussing cost a lot in this conversation, but before we get to cost, what would you say are some of the other factors or drivers for why cloud is so important? And can you illustrate the case study that you were referencing earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely cost is one of the the first conversation starters for the cloud. That is the one that brings everyone on the table. The cloud maybe somehow equates in cost savings, and definitely there is a shift from capex to a variable opex, which is a great attraction to the businesses to save cost. But the number one reason companies do shift to the cloud is for the speed and the agility the cloud brings. And the point was just made that now cloud has become essential. It is the backbone of these things. So cloud, the agility and the speed that it brings to the organization to really stand out and be able to compete and bring. So some of the the main benefits this agility and speed brings to organizations is, number one, if you look at traditional IT and traditional way of work, being able to provision the necessary infrastructure and everything, cloud allows you to, number one, provision that infra in a matter of minutes, as opposed to weeks if you were doing it on-prem. And number two, it allows you to turn your ideas into real products and services using pre-built, ready-to-use services available in any public cloud available today. And one of the other things is allows your very precious resource, which is your developers, to focus on these differentiating activities, which is to develop, create new value, new customer experiences, new business models, invent, experiment, all of those things. So it allows you to do that, helps them automate, their work. And last but not the least, this agility really gives companies the benefit of that time to market, which can be crucial, allows them to respond to competition, the companies out there, be able to, build those, business models that I just touched on. So cost is there.
I can just stop you
agility and speed is the one that really.
Yeah, absolutely. Hassan, what's interesting is, so we've been having several of these technology-based webinars, and it's interesting how this one theme consistently keeps coming up, and this idea of how through areas like automation and AI, and in this case, cloud, we're being able to free up the technology department to focus on other value-serving areas to the business, right? And this is really what you're referring to right now in terms of what you can provide for customer experience and so on. That is such a consistent theme that I'm seeing, and it just illustrates how the technology department is becoming so much more than simply fixing the technology. They're really aiding and running the business in so many ways. And that's, I think, why you keep hearing so many organizations say, we're not retailers, we're a technology company that happens to sell things. And, we might say we're not a media company, we're a technology company that happens to do online events. Could we give a little bit of the Netflix example? Because I think that case study is really interesting in demonstrating this.
Yeah, absolutely. So Netflix is considered one of the top users of cloud services and cloud native. I think they're one of the biggest Amazon Web Services customers also out there. And they're well known for this agility and this speed. They have, I think, close to maybe 200 million customers worldwide. And I don't know how hundreds of millions of hours of video per day or minute that has been streamed. And in terms of what they did, they started off as a DVD subscription company that would mail out DVDs and everything to the customers. And back in 2008, they had a massive failure in their systems and databases, and for 3 days they were out. So their systems were mainly for vertically scaled. They had single points of failures and everything. That's when they decided that cloud is the way to go. And what they did is they started making distributed, horizontally scaled systems. And the key thing they started moving, and now they're considered one of the top companies to do that, is DevOps or DevSecOps, which is how you combine the operations as well as the developers or the development cycles to considerably develop new products, new services, and keep it up to date all the time. So they have hundreds of services, they have millions of customers, they have thousands of Amazon instances of compute, databases and everything, and very empowered workforce. Only 70 people they have in their team that manages the whole the DevOps and infrastructure. So that's a huge success for them. I think they push out hundreds of continuous deployment of their code to the sites. It's always up to date, and they're not afraid of experimenting. So for them, the cloud, the DevOps, all of those was a great success.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can all see how successful they are at the moment. Naturally, it wouldn't have been enabled were it not for cloud. So great example there. I'm going to come over to Mark now. Mark, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Yep, very good, thank you.
Brilliant. I want to get to something which I always find interesting in these conversations, right? Which is uncovering misconceptions. When it comes to cloud, what would you say are the most common misconceptions, and what's the truth to those misconceptions?
Yeah, and going back to what Hussein said at the beginning of the session, I think cloud was initially pitched as being a lot cheaper. And I think that may not be the case. If we look at the studies we've done, there's a lot of variables in there. So I think that the biggest misconception and the mistake people make is cloud is cheaper. Now, if you're talking about a discrete application, a ready-made application like email, then yes, it makes a lot of sense. If you're looking at data center type workloads, it can be 2 to 3 times the price of actually running it on-prem. Now, you do get the agility and you do get the quick startup. Okay, so it's a balancing act between those kind of environments. The other mistakes I think people make when you're moving data center type workloads to cloud is the estimation of time and effort. So you have cost is not necessarily cheaper, and the expectation within boards is I'm going to reduce the cost. I don't need any IT. I don't need any people. Right? But this is the misconception. The second part is the misconception is that it's easy and time. People will underestimate. They'll say we can move to the cloud in 3 months, 5 months, 1 year. When you look at applications, you look at the level of refactoring of applications, the integration that, say, your ERP system would have with other systems that you have internally. How do you deal with that? So I think planning, when you're talking data center migrations, are largely underestimated. The other one is the effort in the migration can also put a lot of stress on your people. So you've got a team that is used to managing something using certain tools. When they move to the cloud world, it's a new console, a new set of tools. So I think there's a lot of things to on the outset. It's easy, it's cheap. That's a little bit too good to be true if you're looking at data center type workloads. I'm totally with Hassan with his view to getting a specific application up and working. And also, I think if you're looking at the new world, AI and the IoT type space, absolutely essential backbone. And the last one, which I'll just come on to, is is controlling those costs, which we'll get onto a little bit later in the event. But you can make it effective, but it has to be managed. It's not something that would just sit there and run cheaply. You have to manage that.
I love this, Mark, because I think this is really getting to what we said we were going to do in this session, which is not just talk about cloud is wonderful, you should all do cloud and say goodbye. We really want to get to the truths of the situation. And you've already pointed one out straight away, which is, look, it's not naturally going to be cheaper right off the bat. There are more nuances to that. I asked you in the run up to this to prepare a slide for us and take us through some specifics, and we'll come to that a little bit later. So you'll actually demonstrate, when we're talking cost, what the specifics are with the different models and how you want to best select the model, how that's going to affect cost. We'll come to that a little bit later in the session. So thanks for giving us that early insight. I'm going to take an audience question right now. I can see Tanvir is putting a question in, and just once again to the audience, I'm paying close attention to the Q&A and to the chat. So please do put your questions in there. Brother, I'd like to come to yourself for this question. But firstly, how are you?
Doing very well. No, pleasure to be here. Yeah.
You just landed on a flight minutes before getting on the session, right?
That's right. So if I'm a bit, off, then there's an excuse there.
No, I'm sure you won't be. I'm sure you won't be. Thank God the flight wasn't delayed. But look, I'm looking at the question here from Tanvir, and he's asking, cloud has been there for a decade. Why is adoption so slow still? What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I think it's a transformation with regard to how we used to build software, right? So software was really built by looking at, monolithic. You have certain groups going in, building capabilities, and really doing that waterfall to say, I'll do all my requirements, start build, and you really have a tight knit between engineering, development organization, and then kind of rolling out. And sometimes they're frankly the same group doing all three things, right? So it's sometimes not, different groups. So there's a complete shift when you're talking about the cloud and how you develop applications, right? So it's really going towards those new types of concepts around microservices. How do you break down components? How do you now develop applications that aren't tightly integrated, but rather distributed? And now you have to define certain APIs and then validate and test those APIs in segregated environments. And that brings different challenges. And when Mark was talking about cost, it's now not the cost of the infrastructure, right, which you're paying up front. It's now the cost of designing the applications in that application space, and those services tailored to the cloud. And which is a benefit, because what you're doing is you're not now concentrating on infrastructure and maintaining servers and consoles and switches. You're now going into, which is about 90% of what engineering a lot of times does, because it's trying to make sure that you have an uptime guarantee, you're making sure those services are available, and have redundancy networks. Now you're shifting that concern to say, well, there is a certain level of availability that the cloud brings, managed services. So typically when you evaluate clouds, one of the things as a step is to look at those managed services and say, are these actually managed services? Because then when you develop applications, you develop it for that distributed network thought process. But then you also want to look at, when you're looking at the cost, and we're kind of going to that a little bit, is how you develop it for scaling, but also descaling, right? Because your workloads are going to shift. And that's how you start to get those gains on understanding what is not having everything available all of the time, but intelligently putting that, enabling your services while also descaling those services, because there's frankly not that much workload, right? So those are the concepts that you need to think, but it's really a mind shift onto more microservice, API-based software. And there's a big shift in that direction. And then how do you orchestrate that in a distributed cloud? And there's now lots of concepts around hybrid clouds and not just, a single cloud provider and getting locked in.
Yeah, and certainly things have evolved within the kingdom itself, right? Being one of the first countries to adopt governance frameworks and compliance in that sense. I think the ability for Saudi organizations to adopt cloud is far simpler now than it might have been before. And I think when you have hybrid frameworks that can be employed, it gives a lot more flexibility in how you approach it. So certainly times are changing as well, and maybe that could also answer this question of why it happened a decade ago, cloud came about, but the adoption is starting to happen now. I expect from what I'm seeing that whilst it's been that time frame, I think this next year or two, it's probably going to hyper accelerate. Would you see it in a similar way, that we're now going to see a really speedy uptake of cloud within the kingdom?
I would agree to that, and you can kind of see what we went through last year, right? So it might have been COVID, but one other speaker actually put it really well. He said, well, it wasn't the year of COVID, it was actually the year of cloud, right? Because everyone switched all of their services to cloud-based services and started to shift all of their office, not just their office environment, but then also their services. So you're seeing an acceleration because of people now having these mobile, or I would say remote conversations, instead of going into the office, having that conversation face to face, having a whiteboard. So there's concepts and applications that are really pushing us towards that. So now we've gotten that, I would say, that rapid scale. It's now to sustain that, and then the adoption of building new services. So you got the base platform, and now you have to build the next level tier on services.
100%.
Can I just chip in there?
Of course, yeah. Go ahead.
The other thing that I think has matured immensely, and I'm looking to Dr. Hussain as well for this one, is in the early days, there was a lot of confusion over data governance and what was allowed and what wasn't, especially from a local perspective. I think with the cloud policy, the definitions are a lot more clear now within the kingdom, and there's still the challenges of how do I, so you've got technical, as Badr said, on the applications, refactoring, re-engineering. You've also got my data. So then you've got where does that sit? What's the governance on that information? I think the guidelines from the government has been a lot clearer in the last.
Shall we, Mark? I'm really happy that you came in right here. Shall we take a moment for anybody who may not already be familiar? Shall we just, in very simple terms, just establish that before we continue on? So, what are the fundamentals of that governance framework as far as data storage? If you could explain that would be great.
Yep, there's. I'm not the expert, and I would expect Hussain to correct me where I get it wrong. But you've got information that is allowed. You've got things like personal identifiable information, national ID, a CAMA number, things that pertain to an individual. If it's bank account details, anything which could be misused. We have very good guidelines within the kingdom now for where that data can reside. So it can be public, but it has to be in kingdom. So there's a level of guidance on that. You've also got non-identifiable information. So it's where can that be stored? How can it be stored securely? So that's one part is the location. But the second part is then how does the governance work on that? So how are you going to ensure that that information is secure? How are you going to make sure that the backups that are taken in your cloud provider don't suddenly go off out of country or get manipulated in some way? So you've got the two parts. You've got the legislation and the guideline, and then you've got the assurance. Now, if you're coming from a banking government background, you have those assurances built in. It's in your process. If you're then looking at them putting that onto a third party, is how do you ensure those actually happen? So that's what I mean by data governance. Classification. If it's coming out of military, it will be secret, top secret, public information. So it's your classification. How do you roll that through the cloud environment? So sovereignty of that information. But Doctor is the expert on the panel for that. So I've hopefully set the scene.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's go with that. And then in a moment, I'll come back to Badr as well, who's got some points on data masking, which can also provide a bit of insight and security. But as you rightly said, Mark, Hussain, would you like to establish that further then, as far as governance and the compliance? What do we need to consider? Yeah.
Yes, actually, we have seen the last 3 years in Saudi Arabia, the government actually launched a cloud-first policy. So 2 years ago, any government or big enterprises, they want to build a new infrastructure, they need to consider cloud as a first choice. And if they want to go to a different direction, they need to give a lot of justification why is that. Then we have the matter, actually, there is 2 legislation came out. The first one to regulate the market. So who will be a trusted cloud provider here in Saudi Arabia? So we have that set and we have that checklist. So you need to have a license to provide clouds. It's not like before, anyone can claim the service. Now there is that checkbox and requirements before you are providing that to government or enterprises. And also we have another direction, as Mark said, we have the data, guidelines and legislation where the data are already classified, and it's a unified classification for the whole government. So now everybody, every entity, every organization, government or private, they know exactly where to put their data, how to handle that, and it's okay for them to have and engage third parties with certain requirements, So all these are in place. These are maturing and, making the talk with cloud more easy from the experts to the decision makers. Before that, all these questions were vague. You cannot actually answer them. And if you try to answer them, the decision maker might not, trust your answer. But now this is already put into a legal framework and regulation by the government itself. So we will see a lot of deployments of cloud computing before then.
Brilliant. Thanks, Hussein, for making that clear. And as you pointed out, the cloud first policies has become so clear in how exactly you want to classify and go about your particular structure and framework. What this is bringing to mind for me, and I want to bring this point now to Amjad, this idea of there's many different approaches, right? So clearly there isn't a one size fits all for every organization, whether you're government, private, if you're in one industry versus another. Amjad, you work with a lot of companies and you advise them on the particular structure and framework that they should take to employing their cloud framework. When you're assessing these companies, so let's say if somebody comes to you and you're assessing which particular framework to put them in, what's your criteria of things that you're examining before you're making that classification? I think that could be very useful for any companies doing the same thing.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would refer to what Mark said and what Dr. Hussein said. As you said, cloud is not a one size fits all. There are different solutions and the different complications depending on the customer need. What we do in NORNet, we see our role in molding such technologies to make it of value to our customers, understanding the maturity cycle that the customer is in and his unique requirements and his unique situation. So what we look at, for example, for some customers, his requirement could be as easy as just taking Office 365 services and having it on the cloud, very straightforward, taking it and putting it on Microsoft. But for many customers, as Badr said, there are different distributed workloads depending on different applications, different requirements. What we do, we're really trying to have that orchestration layer where we try to keep an equal distance between all providers in terms of hyperscalers and our own cloud, and try to understand the customer's requirement and provide the needed solutions around it. So that for some customers, there are strong mandates by the government that they need to have their own, for example, cloud in-house. They need to have their own DR in a specific way. They might have already invested in building their on-prem setup. But meeting the customer mandates or the government mandates would require 1, 2, 3, 4. So we go and analyze every specific case for our customers and try to provide solutions around them. And it's also worth mentioning that, as we said, the government is really playing a very proactive role in trying to regulate things and make things of value and of sense. I've seen also, it's just not only to that, they're also trying, they really see the cost as a big initiative. And trying to localize data. There is an underlying competition between governments in trying to localize their data, being their own assets. So the government of Saudi Arabia, they've announced a program recently where they are trying to control the tariffs of the electricity that are related to cloud to make sure that there is more competitive offering happening in the market. We know that cloud is all about scalability, but trying to control the main cost streams is really a way to make sure, local providers, local license providers, as Dr. Hussein said, they can come with very competitive pricing. So this is how I see things. There are many customers, for example, who are just born out of Vision 2030 and they have a green field, for example, like NEOM. And those guys, they have very strategic values and they have very strategic data and they have the opportunity and the advantage of starting from zero. For those guys, I mean, many of them, they go for hybrid clouds, where we go and engage in building a design from the scratch, taking into consideration their network requirement, server architectures, application requirements, security requirements, and then integrate that into a seamless solution and offer the needed managed services on top of it. So it's not an easy, cloud is one word. Yeah, cloud is something that no one knows. But I mean, there are people behind that to make it that easy. So it's not easy in nature. You have really to dig deep into each case and see your relevance and where you fit into that and take that journey. And this is exactly what role we're trying to play in the market, helping customers understand. One of the other things we discussed the other day, Nayab, if you remember, about if I've done an investment already in my own infrastructure, if I bought, for example, a certain platform that it's not only depreciated for a year or two, it makes no sense for me to go to the cloud, even if the cloud is cheaper, because I did not consume my asset yet. So there are solutions that you can think of utilizing your current assets and then maybe expand into the cloud for a reason or another. And as Hassan said, it's all about scalability up and down based on your business so that you focus on your core business.
Absolutely. Just to summarize there, because it might have been missed by some of the audience, you know, when we talked about having those two extreme examples to illustrate the differences. So on that larger end, if we detail the architecture of let's say, the differences between the two extremes, could you just highlight that, for us?
Okay, so for a customer, for a small business who just wants to have their own productivity applications running, they just can go and subscribe for Office 365, where they have their own Office suite and email service and whatever. And it can be as easy as that. For some, for example, for their VIP management team, they want to localize their Exchange. There is a hybrid solution that we can build between Exchange and Office 365. For other complicated setups, as we said, for example, if you want to look at NEOM or other Vision 2030 companies, when they look, that first of all, NEOM is a new baby, but I mean, it's a giant over time. And maybe the scalability that they will have in terms of number of employees, maybe the Netflix analogy would really make lots of sense. So you need to have that platform that is providing, first of all, the architecture that it will carry, okay? And if it's a private cloud, you have to make sure that all the pillars of this setup are there to carry this high-rise building. So there are network architecture things that you need to take care of. There is a server architecture that you have to take care of. There is a security architecture that you have to take care of in terms of LAN, WAN, maybe at a network layer, maybe at a firewall layer, maybe at an application layer. So you go and mix different breeds of solutions based on that, and make sure that this structure is there to carry, for example, a growth of employees to a 10,000 or a 15,000 to a 30,000. So these are the differences. There are companies like, for example, insurance companies, where they have a mandate by SAMA to do localization for their data, for having a DR. So some of them, maybe they have already invested in their on primary setup, but they need a DR. A DR can be a public cloud thing where we can go and do the design and integrate to that private on-prem cloud, making sure that we tick all the boxes in terms of, DR. We use replication tools that are natively there, or we use other companies like Carbonite to make sure that this solution is delivered. We add
Absolutely.
another.
Sorry, Amjad, if I could just stop you there for a second. Some really good points there. And I just want to ask you one question from the audience that we've got right now. And I feel like you're the right person to answer this because you work with several different vendors. You're not just stuck to one. So I'd like to ask you what's being asked here from one of the attendees. He's saying licensed and approved cloud service providers are very limited, in his opinion, and we don't have options to select from vendors. How could we get around that? I mean, do you agree with that, or do you feel there are actually plenty of options? What are your thoughts on the amount of licensed and approved cloud service providers?
Yeah, I'll tell you one, as Dr. Hussein said, licensing service providers is just like giving validity or credibility for local companies that those guys are really, meeting the government requirements in terms of cloud and NCA requirements in terms of security. And there are, by the way, different classifications. So you can be a licensed cloud provider for an enterprise market. And there is also another licensed private cloud, a public cloud provider for government. And there are different metrics around that. Looking at this, I think, There is a handful licensed cloud providers. I don't think it's about if this is a license I want to go to it. For example, Microsoft Cloud is not a licensed cloud in Saudi Arabia. Amazon Cloud is not a licensed cloud. I mean, it's just your convenience, what workloads that you need to have, and what kind of a mix of clouds that you need to achieve your overall system, and to make sure that, I mean, I can go to this cloud and then I can shift to the other cloud. So it's like engineering the whole experience itself is a great value that we're really trying to bring to the market and to add to this thing, because as you go, I mean, in the market there are different brand names around and everyone is claiming everything, but there is a value for each and everyone, and that you need to smartly understand, and you have to be easily able to shift workloads from one to another seamlessly so that your business is not influenced.
Absolutely. And I think to add to that, I do know from having spoken to you and with Mark from Nutanix, both of your LinkedIns are going to be provided to everybody watching this right now. So there is a lot of complexity. Yes, it's becoming easier. There's still a lot of complexity. And I would urge the audience members, connect with Mark, connect with Amjad. They're really knowledgeable on the topic, and I'm sure I'll be more than happy to advise and to help. Thanks for answering that, Amjad. And I'd love to bring the topic now to Mohammed Shalan. Mohammed, hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you very much. Thank you for hosting me.
Yeah, really good to be on with you right now. We had a little bit of a chat and we said, okay, what's one of the really important things that the audience needs to know about? I think governance is absolutely critical to discuss. And you've kindly put together like a 10-point list to consider as you're going about your cloud journey to ensure that you've got a strong cloud governance. So over to you, Mohammed. If you could take us through those 10 points, it's really nicely summarized, and we'll give some insight to the audience of these points.
Okay, great. Actually, yes, governance is everywhere today, because governance is technology governance. We are talking about cloud governance. We are talking about business governance. So this is very important. And maybe in my opinion, actually, we have like 3 points for this governance is taking a lot of intention now. First of all, the agility and speed to have a quick decision and to allow flexibility to change the directions. So this is always we are doing now. The value deconstruction. So usually now we are moving from complicated solutions into complex solutions. We have a solution from different vendors, from different organizations. We are orchestrating a lot of activities. Similarly, the multi-layers actually for cloud, we have multi-layers. You as a company or as an organization, your cloud will be coming from different providers, and that's you have to orchestrate and to contract very well with these providers. So it is really very crucial now to have governance. For me, actually, the point 1 actually is to determine the organization's speed of movement toward the cloud. So that we need to understand, is it 1 year journey? Is it 2 years journey to move to cloud and to be fully on cloud? The other thing is to decide which percentage we need to have our business critical applications currently on cloud. What percentage should we move everything to cloud, or just we move something? Point 3 will be to assess the cloud related risks with appropriate mitigations, because it's coming from different appetites. Every organization have its own appetite, and we need to take care about it. Point number 4 is to include the third-party supplier risk. And in here we see, like, for example, solar winds. Solar winds have affected a lot of things, and it's called intention in many enterprises who have used this solar winds inside their systems. So it was a real issue. Point number 5, it will be for the baseline, the cost considerations. As my colleague said, actually, it's the cost. It's not we are talking about just cost, but we are talking about its cost saving from some time, but also there is some significant contribution that you need to add. It's cost for implementation, cost for adaptation. So there is a lot of costs you need to think about. Talking to number 5, actually, we have to baseline the cost considerations. And then point number 6 is to have the measure of value versus the risks associated while we are adapting the cloud. Value, as I said before, actually goes beyond the cost saving. We can consider much faster moving to new applications. We can build them, but we need to be resilient, and we need to see how we are moving. So this is very important. As my colleague said also about the DevSecOps, now everyone is talking about development, security, and operation. This is contrary to what was saying before about DevOps only. Now we implement security, and it's really very important that you take care about the risk and the cloud security, as well about the third-party risk. Because usually now when you engage cloud in the middle, then you have a third party in the middle. So you have to take care, you have to take security tests, integration tests, a lot of tests, audit tests. So there will be a lot of things you need to manage with the third party and within the security layer. Moving to number 8, actually, we can consider sensitive data, where to be stored, because we have a lot of regulation here. As Amjad said, for example, the insurance companies have to put their information inside. We have different organizations, we have different regulations like GDPR, like some cybersecurity, like so we have a lot of regulations, and we need to abide to these regulations to see what is the impact of our data. Moving to number 9, actually, we need to ensure that our staff is knowledgeable around cloud, and we have some practitioners and employees inside the organization who can orchestrate at least and coordinate with all these providers, with all services around. So this is very important thing. Moving to the last point, which is point number 10, actually, it's a kind, we need to have an independent cloud audit, meaning that someone from outside need to audit our environment, need to audit the cloud orchestration that we have, so that because sometimes there are significant issues that the internal people will not be able to allocate. So that's why we need to go in and see. So this is very important because I see it's very crucial for sustainability and for the value generation. This is in summary. I know it's a
fantastic,
big topic.
Mohammed. I absolutely love that. You gave a lot of information in a short amount of time. And to everybody watching, we can make recordings available. So if you want to replay that and run through those points. Also, if you'd like those points summarized, I know you've nicely written them out. You sent them to me prior. We'd be happy to share them as well. So thank you so much for giving that. There's a lot of information and a great summary of all the points to consider, or the main points to consider when we're thinking governance. I'm just reading some of the questions that are coming in from the audience right now. And so I feel like it's really appropriate to bring it back to Hassan for a second. Hassan, let's talk about something which I think is on everybody's mind when it comes to the storage of certain types of data within Saudi, outside of Saudi, what's actually possible and what isn't, to be in line with compliance. Can you give us a very simplified but clear breakdown of you're taking that journey to cloud, a step-by-step approach? Where can you store the data? How can you be in line with the compliance? What would you say to
that? Sure, Nayab. Thank you so much. And what Mohammed mentioned, Mohammed Shalan, in terms of his 10-point list, the journey, I'll summarize it, might have some points common with Mohammed in terms of governance. But, as everyone has mentioned so far today, is that, cloud is top of mind with most of the organizations that have digital transformation as part of their mandate, part of their business strategy, all of that. So cloud is that, the main driver. And then from the IT side, you look at the hundreds and thousands of applications, the associated data, the infrastructure, and the teams that work with those, the workforce that work with your infrastructure and applications. So all of those are part of your ecosystem that eventually when you take the journey to the cloud, you have to make sure you have the, rightly trained people, as Mohammed Shalan mentioned. You have to have the right, type of data classifications, application classifications. So what really helps is to have a structured approach, sort of like a framework that helps you, take step by step to go there. And most of the cloud vendors out there, Azure, AWS, etc., they have published their best practices as cloud adoption frameworks. So at a high level, you need to start with the, with the business. What are your desired business outcomes? What is the business strategy? And then that should drive the overall, your cloud or IT strategy in terms of, what do you do? So leadership commitment is a must. So from the get-go of the journey, the leadership commitment, the top-down, goal to move to the cloud has to be there. And then the high-level understanding that cloud can help you move your existing application workloads to the cloud, improve them, modernize them. And number two, which really brings that agility to the forefront, is to help you create those new innovative solutions, those disruptive solutions, the new business models, all of those, helps you experiment. So that's from a more strategic point of view. And then you start to really look at, you need to prepare and you need to plan. And the things I mentioned, you look at your application landscape, look at workload assessments, what's an easy to move, what's a medium level workload to move, what's a really hard level to move. And similarly, you move to the data landscape. What are some of the data people have mentioned so far today in terms of the private information, the GDPR and other compliance metrics or compliance regulations. So you define what data can be classified, what can be taken to the cloud. So that is another exercise. And then the team that manages those applications, they have to be well-versed in using the cloud technologies in the most efficient way to help you move that. So all of these things combined help you build a migration plan. So that's your phase 2, planning and preparation. And then you actually do start that move, start to build on the cloud. And the way you do it is, the tendency could be, okay, let me just move everything together, which is sort of like boil the ocean. But the best way is to take your smaller workloads, your easy workloads that have very less dependencies, to give you that confidence, to give you that,
comfort,
that
right?
confidence,
knowing that you're going to be doing it with ease.
Yeah, build your comfort level, build your experience to go on to do the harder and more complicated things. So once you have built that, it really accelerates, and you can move that, make that the rest of the migration much more efficient. And once you have built that environment, you train your people, you run all of those. Then I'll come to Mohammed's point, which is you have to build governance on usage of cloud, because if you go uninhibited, cloud can be more expensive than your on-prem infrastructure. So security, your operations, everything has to come under that governance, the development, and once you build those pieces of the puzzle together in this sort of a step by step, the last thing is you have the environment, you have to manage it, you have to make sure it's resilient, it's available. So you need to be able to monitor it, you need to improve reliability. Going back to the example of Netflix, they are not afraid to fail or have something, because they can really quickly bring everything up back to as if nothing happened. So they almost have almost 100% uptime and availability. Brilliant. And so these are the things that you have to do in terms of if you build a plan, the business should drive that strategy, then you prepare, you build that infrastructure, you build those applications, move that data, define governance, and then manage your assets. And one thing to keep in mind, you mentioned in the beginning, is those data regulations in Saudi. So CITC has that cloud computing regulatory framework. I think they published a version 3, I think in December or November 2020, that can help you guide that in terms of data sovereignty, data residence, and also data localization. So I think those should be really a good guide to help you plan that journey.
And that's published by CITC, right?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Listen, really nice framework there. And again, I think I'd love to share that with the audience. If you would like to access that, along with the 10 points that Mohammed Shalan gave earlier, those 2 frameworks right there could be really useful in helping you to navigate the next stages as you journey to cloud. I would love to bring a question in a moment. I'm going to be talking to Badr about AI, and it's a really exciting topic, and I really want to get into that. But before we do that, I want to address another audience question and tie it in something that I think, Mark, you're waiting to address anyway. I've got Yahya Asiri here, and he's asking in the chat, how do you address the current challenges facing organizations considering adoption of multi-cloud to gain the most out of the available cloud options in the market based on their strengths? Now, I think the slide that you've got touches on that aspect of the different cloud options. So shall we answer this question and look at your slide and also assess cost as well? What do you think? Yep.
Yeah, let me just share my screen. I'm going to take the chats down. Sorry.
And for the audience now, I'm really excited for this particular part, because we're really going to get into the tangible elements of how you need to go about your cloud costing. So yeah, over to you, Mark. You're going to share the screen, and we're going to take a look at the slide that you have here.
Can you see my screen,
we can,
folks?
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect.
Let me just put the It's a really good question, and I think it shows the maturity of the way in which people have moved forward, because cloud is not a one-size-fits-all type solution. So the question talks about how do you actually make the most of what's available. The challenge that we have is it depends on many things. It depends on the type of application that you are putting in the cloud, or you're looking to actually automate. It depends on the sovereignty of the information, the governance of the information, and the amount of usage those applications would have. So for example, if you have a whole set of infrastructure for dev and test, that tends to be working 10, 15 hours a day. It's not 24/7. Why should you have a whole set of, and it will be, if you're doing some test environments, you may want to spin up some servers, you may want to do some work on those, but then you would close them down when you're not having them. That one is an absolute no-brainer to move to the cloud. If you're looking at other applications, you've then got to say, well, what do I want to do? And we've got the hybrid cloud. Some people are starting to call that smart cloud now. So it's where you're putting your things is in the right place. And what I have here is it's a presentation. It's from a wider presentation. And it's really to look at what I would say would be a typical mid to high end customer, or mid-sized customer who is running 500 VMs. We've got a tool which actually, so there's 500 VMs here. We've got a tool which you put some parameters in, and it does a cost comparison for you. So against this general average scenario, what this does is it says, well, if I was going to run this on my traditional data center with my traditional equipment, with my power, electricity, support staff, this is how much would this cost? The darker blue is CapEx, and the lighter blue is OpEx. And this is a 3-year study, but we get involved in so many of these. And if you're looking at traditionally, it's been a comparison between traditional data center and putting things in the cloud. And in this particular instance, we've used the AWS as a sample for pricing. The local cloud providers have slightly different cost, but it's a comparison against worldwide standard. So you can see that over a 3-year period, the cloud would be a little bit more expensive. However, it would you don't have the data center infrastructure costs. Right? So there's lots of things that can be discussed around that, but that's a general comparison. The second one here is if you were taking a hyper-converged, hyperscaler type architecture, like the ones that Nutanix make, and you replaced that same workload and ran it on-prem. Right, so if you're running it in your private cloud, in your environment, in your data center, typically what we'd see is about 60% saving over a traditional IT over 3 years. And we would also see around about 50% saving over pure public cloud.
And that's a massive difference, right?
It's a massive difference, yeah. And it's one of the, there's very few companies that do this. It's one of the reasons I joined Nutanix, because I moved from the left column to the middle column a few years ago. But yeah, it's quite impressive. Now, then when you then take that,
sorry, just for once more, Mark, I'm really enjoying this right now. I just want to make sure that the audience is fully on board with what's being shown. So the purple and the blue, if you can just give the difference between the two.
Yeah, this would be the expenditure, the capital expense that you would have to buy the equipment to run this for 3 years. So this particular example would be about $700,000. And it would cost you another $800,000.
That's your OpEx. That's your operational expenditure.
That's the cost of yours. And when we do OpEx, we do cost of support, infrastructure, electricity, air conditioning, all the things you would typically be paying on an annual basis. Yeah. When you do this with a hyper-converged type environment, you can run this with less staff. I had a wonderful discussion yesterday. We have a customer, a government entity, which is the equivalent of YESA here. They started on this journey in 2017. They are running the IT now for 30. Sorry, the screen's in. They are running the IT for 75 government entities in their country. It's a national organization, and they run that IT with 8 people. Right? So they've gone from, in 75 different IT departments, the infrastructure is now run with just 8 people, which is exactly what you would see in a cloud environment. So that's why I'm talking about Nutanix private cloud. It's got all the benefits, the scalability, and the cost savings on being able to run things a lot more efficiently. And it was a wonderful discussion. Anyway, but you've still got the CapEx piece, and you've also got the issues that the same was talking about at the beginning is government policy cloud first is to not have individual data centers, because if every government entity has a data center and each one spends that much money, it will become big. There's something in between, okay, which is it's hybrid cloud or smart cloud. And what we're doing here is taking the same systems that you would have in this private cloud, but running it in bare metal hardware in a cloud provider. Now, what we do here is you can see there's very little CapEx. That's just a very small piece of administration servers and that kind of thing. It's all OpEx. And what it does is, because we're not using the micro-segmentation, the wastage that would appear in a cloud type environment, because you have something which is t-shirt sizing for servers. So you might want a VM running on 2 CPUs with 38 gigs of RAM, but you've got to buy 48, and that's micro wastage, and those things kind of add up. So what we found is in a hybrid cloud type environment, what you can do is you don't have the infrastructure yourself, you're running it in the cloud, and this is where we work with Amjad on a few things and people here. So it is in Kingdom, so you've got the compliance things addressed, but you are still paying significantly less than if you were running that outside. My mouse is a little bit slow. So there's this halfway house, and when it came back to the question, there is a balance between each of those environments. Now, the other thing, if you look at these two, you could have a mixture of both. The benefit of using that kind of approach is it's one network. You've only got one set of compliance, one set of operations. You're not running in AWS or whichever vendor, a different set of cloud tools. This is purely native. So your on-prem matches you're in the cloud, and it's one set of compliance, one set of decompression, backups, deduplication, all of those kind of things work quite nicely. But we're seeing, and this is a live study, I'm seeing differences between 50%. I've only seen 26% difference between this model and this one, to be fair. So this one may be optimized, but I'm seeing 20 to 30% by having a hybrid type model savings over traditional public cloud. I used the name AWS there because that was where the instances were taken from.
It's really interesting.
What we're seeing now.
What Mark said, I mean, we're working currently with Nutanix to bring the best of the two worlds in such environment and to bring the needed value to customers.
Sorry, just a moment. I think if you could just move a little bit closer to the screen, and shall we stop sharing for a second, Mark?
What I was saying,
just a moment. We're just going to stop sharing the screen. Just give us 1 second. Much better.
Sorry.
Right. No, that was really well said. Thank you, Mark. And yeah, Amjad, I think you wanted to comment on that, yeah?
Just a small comment on what Mark said. What I said is we have already done the needed partnership with Nutanix, and we have the platform on the ground to bring the best of the two worlds that he mentioned. So that if we are a consumer, we need to be at least a smart consumer and spend on where it matters. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the point about micro wastage was one that when you were going through it really stood out to me about how that could be something that unknowingly might be part of the overall expenditure, right? Some really good points there, Mark. I really like the specifics that you shared on the slide. It's really good to actually see the numbers and to compare and contrast. I'd love now to bring it to Badr and to talk about something that I know a lot of the audience was really keen to understand, which is artificial intelligence. It's a hot topic, whichever event we go to, but let's talk about it in this particular context. And you're a big proponent of this idea of purpose-driven solutions in the age of AI. Could you break that down for us, Badr? How do we go about creating systems and designing them with a purpose in mind, leveraging AI?
Yep, no, thanks for that question. And I think this is kind of also, it could be a bigger session, and definitely would love to kind of go into that a bit more. But just from a summary perspective and kind of bringing a lot of the discussion that we had today, we talked about the cloud, we talked about the enablement, and Mohammed kind of put a nice 10-step approach to say, here's things you need to consider, the DevOps, DevSecOps, and how do you set up the organization. But a lot of times when we do that, it's really the traditional approach to say, well, let's capture all of that data, start storing it somewhere, and then eventually, start to create applications that then benefit our organization, right? So, but not understanding that doing that is also incurring a lot of costs, right? So while you're doing that, so it's not just a micro cost, but you're also incurring costs from that storage perspective, services that you might not require, right? So how do you deal with that when you're talking about building these applications in the cloud? So if I was to break down the approach, this is where a lot of the methodologies from design thinking, customer-centric methodologies come into play, where you say, okay, well, instead of just looking at a service or an application from just a general purpose and say, I'll collect all that data, make an application, let's look at what are the challenges in our businesses or in our services that we're trying to address, right? And that then gets you, and not just look at generally, okay, well, what are the challenges and the user, I would say, technology that we require, but rather, let's say, what is the challenges and the information required to address those challenges, right? Because then now you get into an interesting conversation to say, well, do I actually need that data to power this particular purpose that this user is trying to fulfill, or is it just a data that it's nice to have but doesn't really bring my any value to my organization? So you're really now going into that conversation, and it goes to then going into the next level, where I would say Sadaya, NIC, MCIT, and ICTC has done a great job of that level 4-level cybersecurity classification to say, hey, if it's national security data, if it's data around personal, which layers, and how does that affect your strategy in regards to, do you need to keep that local, or do you need to do you have now options to leverage that cloud first approach? Or when you talk about cloud first approach, if it's governmental data, then leveraging NIC to say, okay, how do we now leverage that the cloud infrastructure you've built there? So you can now have those conversations because you understand the information that you're going to collect, the purpose that you're going to use that information for, and the services that you're going to build on top of that. And then really make decisions on, is this really a monitoring type of service, right? So it's information that I'm trying to give to my customers to make sound decisions, or is it a control type of service where I might be running a large desalination plant, or have a mobility service that these decisions now have an impact on operations, and hey, that might be not something I want to put on the cloud, and rather have something local, or do that have other techniques. We talked a little about data obfuscation to say, okay, how do we hide the identity of that data and the purpose, but just use that a model that generally just tells us, is this a decision I should make, yes or no? If you talk about simple machine learning algorithms, to what are you observing, to then put it into your pipeline. And you get really, and the last thing is, then you get into a conversation of, do I need to put a human operator decision in that loop, in that whole loop process, or do I just can make that direct connection between the insight that I gain to the decision I had to make, to then rolling it out to the field, right? So it's really that purpose driven, rather than let's make a service. We don't understand what's the information model. We can't break it down, and then you get into a lot of problems where then the engineering teams are starting to build very tightly coupled services. And that's kind of what we're looking at here, is to say, how do we break these down, really? Because it gives us a lot of benefit when you talk about this design. And a lot of people say they're running design thinking workshop, it's more of an ideation session. But if you go deeper into those design thinking sessions, it's really then talking about that information, how do you classify that information? What is the purpose and benefit in the service that you're providing? And then how do you separate those concerns to then build those services, and at the end of the day, that then you can map technology onto, right? So it's not a technology first approach, it's really a user and business first approach. Understand that aspect, separate that data, and then build those services, right? And then you really get away from that waste of, is actually a user using that service or not? It might not be, you have awesome functionality, but that functionality is not being exercised because maybe they don't know how to access it.
So would you say then, brother, that there's like a deeper need for IT leaders to get more involved in the specifics of the business and then open up other departments and get more insights there in order to better map that? Is that something that's required, and is it happening enough, do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's a partnership, and I think there's a certain aspect and level that I would say the IT leaders can get involved, because they're going to look at general services, right? So they're always concern is, how do I leverage the infrastructure that I'm providing and get those customers on? The business is more concerned about what is the value that I can provide to my customers. So it's a tension, and I think it's a healthy tension, because exactly, because then you're kind of saying, okay, well, you want to leverage services, but you also want to be smart about it.
Absolutely. But essentially, what I think mindset seems to be the big thing here, right? Because you're talking about purpose here, and I think ultimately that's a mindset. Once that shift happens and you can start to carry out the different steps and the approach that you're dictating, makes perfect sense. And whilst you're on with me now, last question as we're coming to the final minutes of this. We were talking earlier about security, and I know that you're very keen on this idea of data masking to help create a boundary between storage and usage. Could you explain the approach to that and what you mean by data masking? Sorry, is the connection still coming through?
Is it to me, or?
I can still hear you. Can you hear me right now, or?
I can hear you. Was that addressed
that was
to me?
Yeah. Data masking,
sorry.
right? So we're talking, data masking, creating a boundary between data storage and data usage. If you could illustrate that example, what we mean by that?
Yeah. So I think this goes again into that process, right? To say, when you're classifying data, right, there's aspects of, what data do I need to keep at the edge? So cloud is not just about putting services onto the cloud. It's also about looking at what do I keep at the edge, and what do I keep into central services that I need certain compute power, I need certain data storage needs, and that masking is about what do I need to make local decisions when it comes to operational needs, and that could be the smallest segment when you're talking about a vehicle, or it could be at a medium tier where you're talking about people going through doing ticketing and so forth, or purchasing certain services, right? Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily need to ship every ticket, but you need to authenticate and say, hey, this user is actually authorized to use this particular ride. For that, what are so we talk about how do you create an identifier that says, well, this person's actually requesting a service, is he authorized to do that, and then enabling that service at the bottom logic, right? So you don't need to send all the information to the cloud with regards to that user's personal data, and then ship it back down to the ticketing system, or if that service that they're going to say, hey, allow this user through, right? So it's then to say, we made that decision, he is allowed, and then doing the control logic and separating those concerns. So it's really masking out, and masking out, the reason I call it masking out is because you're really separating what is edge responsibility versus what is responsibility and general services that you're providing to the cloud. Those also avoid issues when we're trying to pushing too much to the cloud. You have really latency issues, right? So a lot of people underestimate the amount of latency you might have when you're talking about real-time needs. And people then say, okay, well, let's put a full video streaming service online, and then try to do analytics in the cloud, and then make those key decisions at the edge. And here really approaches around, do I really need to ship all of those images to the cloud, or do I need to, can I go away with, where I see certain behaviors that I'm monitoring at the edge, and then masking those images to say, okay, well, there's key decisions that you need to make from an overall framework perspective, and then ship that to the cloud, generate those insights from a model perspective, and then send out your control logic. So this is where a lot of times when we're talking about, you know, running and powering AI type of solutions, it's really understanding how those models work, and not necessarily needing everything for the input layer when you're talking about machine learning, or if you're talking about an optimization algorithm, that you don't need all this data. You really need a certain amount of data to power those models to then get an outcome from it, right? And understanding how those algorithms work to then make those decisions on, well, that's too much data for the cloud, versus I need to make certain real-time decision. It's really not important to keep all that information around.
Brilliant. I really like that example. And as you said, I mean, latency and speed, there's so many different benefits of creating that separation. We're coming to the final minutes of this session, and it's been really, really interesting. So many different perspectives, but ultimately really helping guide the audience in how to go about their cloud. I think the final question in closing, I'd love to bring to Mark. And Mark, we've got this question from Omid Mabubi, and he's asking, can the esteemed panelist also talk about the cost of connectivity to the cloud in KSA? Can it impact TCO analysis? In other words, the last mile. What would you say to that, Mark?
Yep. There's two parts there, and Amjad is the best person to answer because I've done some things like this with him. But I'll just come on there. There's two parts. You've got how is your current connectivity working? So are we connecting to the internet? Are we connecting to the cloud through the internet, or are we actually creating a dedicated connection? And that's going to depend very much on quality of service, things that you need to do. So I would say, yes, connectivity is very, very important. I was a customer of Amjad's, and before I joined, so he analyzed all of my data center communications, increased it by about 200% and reduced the cost by 40%. So yes, it's a very good question. Comms costs in the kingdom have got a lot more efficient. I mean, I built my first network here 2001, and costs were very, very expensive. We had one or two suppliers. It was very, very restrictive. It's become a lot more cost effective now, and there are organizations that will help you broker that. So yes, it's something to be considered. You have to make sure that, you know, are you going out through the internet? So low quality of service, interruptions, or are you going to go dedicated? That's the other one point. The other question, which we didn't bring up earlier, is you always think of information coming from your organization to your hosted site. One of the biggest areas for cost misinterpretation is when you're extracting information back from your cloud service. So if you're pulling, I was working with an airline recently outside the kingdom, and they were pulling down all of their bookings and customer databases every day from the cloud. Their data egress costs were 30% of their hosting costs, and that was something they hadn't accounted for. So you've got two-way comms. It is expensive, or it needs to be considered, but it's not as bad as it used to be, and it's part of getting that picture of the overall costs of how much it's going to cost to put your applications in the cloud. But Amjad, I mean, maybe you can just talk about efficiency there and how you look across the kind of different environments and optimize that.
Thank you, Mark. I'd like to tackle this in two different dimensions. Dimension number one, cloud itself as a technology is doing a paradigm shift in connectivity world. I mean, with everything, I mean, if you want to look at the connectivity, I mean, that used to be like a coconut model where you're trying to protect everything. You have a strong shield around and you're protecting your data. And now it's shifting to an avocado model where the core is there and I mean, and your data is out. So this is really putting too much dependency on the internet, and there are new technologies born to protect and offer the needed security layer where SD1 is really taking over. And we as a company we're taking a lead on this, and we're trying to deliver that as a solution, coming with the dynamics that are happening on the connectivity and the changes that the cloud is really causing. The other thing is, I mean, if you're just looking at a simple example of a customer where he has data that is offered to the public, having that on the cloud could be a cost-effective kind of solution, because if you have it in your on-prem, you have to have that fat pipe to connect, and you keep sending data from your own head office. But when you're having it in a data center on a local cloud or a public cloud, that data is residing on the cloud. So you're at least saving the cost of that connectivity to your head office. So maybe you'll be paying on hosting or cloud, but maybe on the other side, you'll be saving on the connectivity part. So again, it's not like a one size fits all. We have to go into every single need, analyze it, and come up with something that makes sense to our customer. And that's it.
Fantastic. Brilliant. We actually have a couple of minutes, and I think, when we talk about one size fits all, I think it could be really good actually to finish off with Mohammed Shalan, talking about an example that might be on the other side of the spectrum. So Mohammed, look, you're doing several things. You've been an author of a book, but one of the many things that you're doing is that you're part of the PMI KSA chapter, which is, it's a non-for-profit organization. So for you, when you're taking a cloud approach, keeping the operational costs and just keeping the budget in general as low as possible is critical. So what has your approach been to cloud in this context of keeping costs as low as possible? How have you gone about it?
Okay, actually, I have the hat of PMI KSA'S digital transformation volunteer on this. But what we have done, actually, we have set up ourselves quickly. And for this, we need to cloud. What the services we are doing some education services or awareness service about project management. So when we think about it, actually, we think about how cloud can help us, because first of all, we need to have a low overhead, meaning that we don't have huge budgets like Neum or other enterprises. We need to have something that's sustainable and simple so that we can run it, because volunteers are coming in and out. The third point is agility and flexibility. Every time we are doing something, we are adding a few things. For this, we think about cloud. We had set up very quickly in 1 month time almost. It was internal email and collaboration services, volunteer portals. We have collaboration services with stakeholders, sponsors, students, universities. We were thinking about the knowledge sharing tools, like Knowledge Hub and webinar platform for our seminars and webinars. We talk about the internal projects that we are handling, and also about the public website and integration with the global PMI, which is the major organization we are moving. And the thing actually is that we could set up all of this into cloud, like in 1 month time. It was very easy, and it was run by volunteers only. So we have done all the planning, all the configuration by volunteers without additional overhead. So for this was very good. Today, actually, we are reaching, like in few months, we are doing more than 200 volunteers. We are collaborating with them throughout the kingdom and outside even. We have run more than 50 webinars and seminars. We have run 2 competitions. We have participated in several high-profile kingdom events. And all of this actually was not possible actually if we don't have cloud. So the really cloud had a great value for us, run by volunteers, and it was really an amazing experience that get value in a short time.
Fantastic. That's a really good summary. Yeah, go on, Amjad.
On the cloud, this is the extremist that I've ever heard.
But look, what I like about that is it illustrates the different models that can be employed, right? So for anybody who's looking to work with small budgets and still get the skin in the game, there's many different approaches to it. Look, finally, in closing right now, I would like to just come to Mark. And Mark, we had several conversations in the run up to this. I really enjoyed speaking to you and how you simplified a lot of these ideas. There's so much more to delve into. There's only so much we could do in this given time. But if any of the audience are watching and they have more questions, how do they reach out to you? How do they continue the discussion? And can you help them with more ideas if they need it?
Yeah, basically, it's my role as a cloud economist. It's a very new role. I'm considering Nutanix created that role probably about 2 years ago, and I've been in it for 18 months, a little over that. So my role is to help exactly in that situation. It's to analyze where we are as an organization, how with customer organizations, sorry, not just me. So where that organization is, what's it looking to achieve, how its objectives are going to be met, what's their growth plans, what's their cost concerns, OPEX, CAPEX, which is preferred. And what I do is I work with those customers and I come up with an optimum model. It's not something to drive you towards a particular solution. Mine is to get best value for customers. And I work across all sectors, commercial, and I work across all markets. So I actually work across the whole region. So I get to the government NCRs of yesterday was in the north of the region. Wonderful experience, and I can bring the way they're running their systems and benefits back into Saudi. So reach out, LinkedIn, I think.
We've posted it in the chat, so we'll definitely be there. And don't let the accent fool you. For the audience, don't let the accent fool you. He's based in the kingdom, so I'm sure you'd be happy to do it face to face as well.
I've been in Riyadh for 20 years, mashallah. So I think I've known Amjad most of those times, for most of that time.
Well, listen, that was a fantastic closing. Thank you very much, Mark, Hussein, Mohammed, Amjad, Badr, Hassan. Really enjoyed the conversation. I think you're all incredibly knowledgeable in this area. I wish we could have spoken for longer. What I will say to the audience is, this is the first session on this topic. We'll be coming back for more. So let us know if you had questions that you feel you'd really like to get more depth into. We'd be happy to provide it. If there are certain things that were mentioned, like for example, certain frameworks or ideas, and you'd like that shared to you, drop us an email. We'd be happy to get it over. And like Mark said, himself, along with the other panelists, the LinkedIn has been shared. So feel free to reach out and connect with them. I can tell you from my personal experience, I've been speaking to all of them on one-on-one occasions. They're all very friendly and they're all very happy to help out. So thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience for attending. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon ahead. And I'm really excited to continue to see Saudi develop towards its 2030 vision and adopt cloud in a greater measure. Thank you very much. Have a great day.